Good afternoon, this is John. I'm the spokesperson for Group 1 regarding our report on Module 1. I'll start by acknowledging country that this report was drafted and recorded on Yungambah Gumbaynggirr Dharug land, being Gold Coast, Coffs Harbour and Toukley, and we acknowledge and respect elders past, present and emerging. Michael successfully found a very good article regarding decriminalisation of substances in Australia, and it made reference to the Portugal model, so we'll discuss that here in brief, and we'll expand upon our report in this recording. So let's just talk about the war on drugs. War, by definition, is an extension of politics by other means, according to Clausewitz. But another definition of war is any invasion or apprehended invasion or attack or apprehended attack on Australia by an enemy or armed force, as per the Defence Act 1903, section 4.1, under the Commonwealth laws. Well, what substances are actually an armed force? They're not. So we've had a war on drugs since Richard Nixon was last in power back in 72, that's 52 years ago, and we're still fighting it. So if we're still fighting the war on drugs since 1972, one would suggest that we have not actually won the war yet. In fact, I'll state it unequivocally. We are losing the drug war. We are losing the war on drugs. Because it's not a war, it's a three-word slogan. It's like the war on drugs, the war on terror. Be alert, not alarmed. Barnaby Joyce is a tomato. And that's quoting him if you don't mind. It's not real. So if you don't have real policy settings, you're not going to have real public health or real justice outcomes. Let's talk about the three models currently in action. We have prohibition. I don't need to expand on that. It's the status quo in all jurisdictions with the exception of the ATC as we speak, ACT. Decriminalisation is what Portugal went to, and I'll talk about that soon enough. And legalisation is being trialled in some American states as we speak. So I won't expand on prohibition, it's self-evident. I will talk about decriminalisation in Portugal. Portugal had a 1% heroin addiction across their population back in the 1990s. Now, if we look at a bottle of milk and take out 1%, you're not going to notice it. It's neither here nor there. If, however, you give 1% of your population an illness, you will notice it. I will find and post later the stats on COVID to give you an idea of what it did, but most people can't conceptualise, myself included, 1% of the population. It was so bad in Portugal that there were entire towns where you couldn't walk the streets without seeing needles on the ground or junkies passed out in the street, and it got to the point where they had a human resource problem in supplying essential services like hospitals and schools. To take the model away from a criminal one, a prohibition one, they established a drug court. As an alternative to incarceration, there was voluntary rehabilitation backed up by a 3-year wage subsidy for someone who'd done the rehabilitation course. And then what that did was it removed the stigma of being an addict or a former addict. It turned the tax taker into a tax maker by getting them out of jail, at least not spending as much tax with the subsidy. It established the businesses in those towns where they were having labour shortages. And from a business point of view, it's much easier, or it's an easier choice to choose to employ a new employee where that new employee has a wage subsidy attached to them. After the 3 years, which appears to be the magic number for rehabilitation regarding substances, and recidivism regarding criminal conduct if there is an addiction with the criminality that incarcerated someone. And by taking all of these people out of the criminal system, it did a couple of things. It took the pressure out of the justice system. It didn't expose otherwise normal citizens with a healthcare problem to hardened criminals. It removed them from another supply of drugs, being the jails themselves. It prevented what's happening in New South Wales now whereby a drug addict ends up in jail, has to buy drugs on credit inside, and then owes a debt, so is recruited into a criminal gang in New South Wales and can never get out of it because he can never pay the debt and ultimately relapses and ends up in jail again. Now, it broke that cycle. For the sake of the discussion, if it was a war, Portugal won their war on drugs in a decade through decriminalisation. I'd like to discuss this further. Let's have a look at some of the problems they're having in America. They've gone one step further by legalising. So if we think about this as a pendulum, on one side of the swing we have prohibition, in the middle we have decriminalisation, on the other side of the swing we have legalisation. Well, what happened in California was that they expected that, and I'll speak to marijuana, cannabis for now. Cannabis was legalised. The predicted outcomes were that cannabis use would increase, that law enforcement expenditure of resources on drug enforcement would decrease, so there'd be savings there and those resources could be deployed elsewhere within the public economy. That revenues would increase from a licensed drug trade through both license fees for the retailers and tax on the substance as it was sold, like a GST. And everyone would be happy because they could get their smoke, cops would be not as busy, public treasuries would be fuller. Kumbaya, pass the duchy to the left-hand side. What actually happened was that because it was about $1 million for a license to be able to retail marijuana, the criminal elements moved in en masse because they didn't have the startup costs. Their price point was significantly cheaper than lawfully retailed substances. Because of the prohibition, increase of the product purchases did indeed increase, but the retailers were going broke and were jumping up and down screaming blue murder, saying, why aren't the cops doing their job? The job couldn't keep up with the influx of street dealers, for want of a better term. It got so bad that at least in Washington state, they prohibited several substances, starting with fentanyl, because they'd lost control of their streets. Because the absence of that prohibition led to a massive market that was unregulated, decriminalised, and they had a massive public health problem as per Portugal back in the 1990s. They have gone back and they have re-prohibited in Washington state. So, where are we at? What's going on with this problem of ours? This Monday past was the first anniversary of decriminalisation in Canberra, and I'll post the radio show. There appears to have been no sky fall over Canberra. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I won't get into. It's a different topic. They haven't got a public health crisis. They haven't got a public crime crisis. There's an increase in things like pill testing, etc., all good things, less hospitalisations, etc. Probably some very good things, and they've gone with the decriminalisation model. So, as a good law thinker, we always have to put up a counter argument. If marijuana is more carcinogenic than, say, tobacco, and we know that tobacco causes lung cancer and heart disease is right up there with one of the top causes of adult deaths, why would you introduce another substance that is more carcinogenic? Maybe there's some benefits of prohibition in this instance regarding some negative side effects, being cancer for a smoked inhaled product. I don't have an opinion on it. I don't actually have the research on that, but it's a point I'd like to discuss in the board. So, I would like to thank the listeners here today. I'd like to thank and appreciate my fellow authors, Alex, Madison and Michael. And I look forward to our discussions in the discussion board with this unit, and I'd love everyone to disagree with us and put some counter arguments up there for us. But I will leave you with one last thought regarding drug policy in Australia at the moment. And it's whether it is nobler of the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, being an unwinnable war on drugs, or by taking an arms against a sea of troubles, being quality, scholarly, public policy devoid of political miscreants, and by doing so, end them. My apologies to the late Prince of Denmark and William Shakespeare. Thank you again for your time and your trouble. This has been John for Group 1.